Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of A Happy Moment. My name is Dan. Glad to have you with me today. And today I've got a fun episode. I will be chatting with Shannon Lawrence. She is a horror author. She has a new book coming out later in March called Myth Stalker, Wendigo Nights. And she also is a host of a podcast called Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem. Shannon, welcome to the show.
Good to be
Yeah, glad to have you. So, very excited to talk about some horror and spooky stuff with you today. As I mentioned, you have a book coming out. Is that near the end of March?
Yeah, March 26th.
Okay,
So,
cool.
yeah,
Okay.
it's I will say so I have other books out that are short story collections and then a nonfiction, but this is my debut novel. So this is the first time
Oh,
I'm
okay.
putting a novel out and it's urban fantasy. Most of my short fiction is horror. So
Okay. Are you nervous?
I don't think I'll ever not be nervous. This is technically my sixth book. And then I've had over 50 short stories published in other publications, and I don't think I'll ever not be nervous when one comes out. Like, you just never know. So, it's
Yeah.
quite a run up to a re
How long have you been writing for?
I kind of the cliche answer, but I've been writing since I was a kid. I started writing to publish, though, I would say probably around 2007 or so, somewhere in there. So, a few years now. That's a that's how you get all those short stories out there, but yeah, it's been a while.
And have you always been interested in horror and fantasy since you started writing?
Yeah, as a kid, I was really into those things, kind of like I loved going to the library and getting all the books that I could find on local ghosts and stuff like that. I love the ghost stories, which was also kind of part of the history too, because you get the background of the people. So each one of those was going to be an actual story too. And then I think that's what what draws people to all the ghost shows and stuff that are on TV too, is that you get these backstories. So you get these little compact stories with all of it. But I really liked that. And then I discovered horror short story collections, but like aimed at teenagers back in the day and like there was a story called Taylipo, and that one stuck with me for a long time, but they're kind of like wives' tales, I'd say. So those were fun and it got me hooked.
When I went to the library as a kid too, I always went for that sort of thing. The monster books, and I remember there was that one anthology that was pretty popular back in the day, the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark or something like that. I think they made a movie out of it too.
They did.
But yeah. Is it any good?
I Here's the thing. I did not discover those. I never found those, so I never read them when I was younger. And I don't know when they came out. I don't know if they were already out or if they came out after I was kind of past that and reading Stephen King or what, but I did see that they made a movie and people were super excited about it. And I think people, in general, the people I heard from loved it who had read the books. So it
Okay,
seemed like it was a fair retelling for fans.
okay. I
Yeah.
know the one story that always stood out to me was the one about the girl that has, like, a spider hatch out of her face, and that one always gave me the heebie-jeebies. Anything
That's
with a spider in it.
right. That's funny because it was stuff like that that was in those books that I was finding for teens. I think one was called something like it's gross. And I wonder if you could get away with it with trademark stuff now, but it was like Kentucky Fried Rat or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it had stories like that, like somebody having a spider hatching out of their face or something, but the cover was the Kentucky Fried Rat. So, yeah, those are totally the type of stories that I cut my teeth on, I think.
And you mentioned Stephen King too. Was he one of your favorites growing up?
He was growing up. My dad had all his books in Dinar Kuntzes, and so those were where I started other than those little short stories and ghost stories and stuff, and I kinda grew away from them, which is sad in one way, but in the other way, it's really good because then I started discovering and reading so many different other horror authors and kinda widened my horizons, and that was for the best. But, yeah, I read I read everything that came out Stephen King up until probably my mid-20s.
Oh, wow. I actually never read any Stephen King until just, like, a couple years ago, and I don't even know if it counts as a full novel. I read Cycle of the Werewolf,
Oh,
which is kind of has pictures in it, which is cool. But, yeah, I need to get into some more Stephen King books, definitely.
and have you seen oh, no, the Corey Haim movie that I think is based on Cycle of the Werewolf?
Yes, Silver
Yeah.
Bullet.
Okay, yes, there we go. Yeah,
Yeah, that's what made me check out the book was I saw the movie first.
I got you. It was the same for me. It's been a while since I read it still, but we watched that one. That's like a 4th of July regular watch.
Oh, nice.
I love a holiday horror specific watch. Christmas is easy. Well, even easier than Halloween to find a Christmas themed horror film versus a Halloween themed horror film. But
Right.
yeah.
So would you say that so in my opinion, Silver Bullet, I think that's Stephen King's best movie adaptation. What do you think?
Hmm. I like The Shining with Jack Nicholson because I like Kubrick films.
Mhm.
But I do know the history there, and I do know that that was kind of a in your face Stephen King thing. So it's one of those things that as as a Stephen King fan, you're not supposed to like the Kubrick version, but I
Ah,
did like
okay.
that. But The Shining is also one of my favorite books by him, so that might be part of it. And I've gotten to stay at the Stanley Hotel, which is where he wrote it, and
Oh,
they have the Kubrick film on loop on one of their channels on the TV in your room, and so you can watch it. And so the very first time there, I took my copy of the book and I had it playing, the show playing, and I read the book, and I was like, "I have now read the book while watching the movie in the Stanley Hotel." And then I did like a writing retreat there, but
and then did you go run around outside in the snow without a jacket on or anything?
no, I've lived in Colorado too long to do that, but but I did take a ghost tour there and then do just a history tour. So, because I've been up there a few times. It used to be you could get a really good deal if you were a Colorado local and in the off season. And I think that there's just really not much of an off season anymore, so they stopped doing that. And it's not a cheap hotel. It's a nice hotel. So the the last 2 years I haven't been able to do it, but it used to be a great every February about I'd go in and do just a couple nights, just me, because I'm a mom. When they were old enough, a couple nights there, just writing. It was nice.
That sounds like a lot
But
of
it is an
fun.
old hotel, so it's noisy.
Oh, okay. Like paper thin walls, like
Yeah, but, like, a lot of creaking and a lot of sound, and I know one night I shot up out of bed because there was this scrambling sound really loud, and what it was, when I looked out the window, is like a sheet of ice had slid down the roof and fallen off down below.
wow,
But that sound when you're asleep is is
spooky.
definitely something to wake up to, because they're here.
Oh, that sounds like fun though. So let's talk about Myth Stalker, Wendigo Nights. But before you get into what that's all about, could you explain to everybody what exactly is a Wendigo?
Oh, yeah. So, Wendigo, kind of in general, is somebody who's been taken over by a spirit or Manitou. And the most common way that this person gets it's basically possession, if you were to put it in kind of the more Christian terms, but takes over this person. And the most common way it happens, it's not the only way, but the most common is if they have committed cannibalism. And of course, this was born in Canada and with First Nations folks. And they had, there's rough winters. You know about rough winters. We actually don't have as bad of winters in Colorado as I think people think we do. But it was that sort of thing. It was a cautionary tale at the time. It was a warning of what could happen. It's very much commentary on greed and selfishness and gluttony and that sort of thing. But Wendigo is a possessed human who's turning into this spirit.
Okay. And what role does the Wendigo play in your book?
So my character, Selena, is a myth stalker, and that's where that comes from in the title. And her job is to hunt down creatures from native lore. One of those things where people don't think they're real. She knows they're real, and it's her job to keep them away from people and keep people safe. And she gets a call from her mentor who lives up in Canada, and he tells her he has a case he can't handle, which is weird. She doesn't understand why he can't handle this when he's the one who taught her how to do it. And he says it's a rush. And so she heads straight up there, not knowing exactly what's going on, and ends up in a situation finding out that a loved one is the one who's been impacted and who's being slowly taken over by the spirit. And so she's got to hunt down its sire, basically, the person who got this person up sick, infected. So, yeah.
Okay.
So there's a bit of a mystery wrapped in trying to figure out where it originated and how to find that person who's disappeared off the map, and some nice little Wendigo space. And she runs into a couple other, well, she runs into another, an actual cryptid in the beginning of the book just for fun. And because I wanted to establish that this is what she does and that it doesn't always have to involve something being killed. And she talks about a couple other cases just in brief that she's had. So there's going to be a mix of cryptids and stuff in there because a lot of US and Canadian cryptids originated with tales among Native folks, First Nations, and Native American folks. So,
Okay. And you actually answered one of the questions I was going to ask you. You said that it doesn't always have to end with her killing him. That's what I was wondering. When you say that she takes care of him, does she kill him or does she relocate them?
yeah, so that it right, it's going to depend on the creature, and if it's a really big creature but not dangerous, it's tricky because she doesn't want to bring harm, but you can't just stick them in a cage and move them somewhere. And yeah, and sometimes though she does have to end it with killing something. Wendigo in particular is not typically something that there's any coming back from. So there was, oh, what's it called? Wendigo fever was a real thing experienced by people, es- particularly in the middle of winter when they were trapped in their houses and didn't have access to food and what they needed. And they would believe that they were becoming Wendigo. Uh, That's 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 an established thing, and there were famous Wendigo hunters.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh, I didn't know that they're
yeah.
actually Wendigo hunters. Wow. How long ago was that?
Oh, a long time ago because I know I actually, funnily enough, I covered it, the Wendigo hunters and Wendigo fever on my podcast, and it's bugging me that I can't bring the name up in my head right now. But one one of them was actually a chief to his people, and this whole big thing happened with them, with the trading companies and stuff, and colonization occurring at that time, is that they ended up getting held, getting arrested for doing this work because they would go and a family would contact them and say, "Hey, Uncle Bob is coming down with some Wendigo here and coming in Wendigo. We need you to stop it before he loses his soul." And his job was to go and to take care of that, then to kill the person. So he had killed quite a few people who were impacted by this, who felt that they were becoming Wendigo or their family felt they were. And in came the people who wanted their land and wanted them to be under their law, but they weren't under their law yet. This drove me nuts. And they still managed to pull him into court, to arrest him, to make him stand trial for something that was not their law, and didn't have anybody to represent them speaking their language or anything like that. So they sat in a courtroom. It was him and his brother, and got tried, had no idea what anybody was saying, had no way to defend themselves. Yeah, it's really, it's a dark part of history too. It really hits on that part of it. But yeah, famous. There is a famous Wendigo hunter, and you can look him up since I'm not remembering his name. It was Jack.
Okay.
Driving me nuts. But yeah, so there is a lot of history to it. But for Wendigo, usually you have to kill them. And I will
Okay.
say part of the problem in my book is that it's a loved one. She doesn't want to kill him. That's why she is trying desperately to find a different way to fix the problem. And historically, she's not finding anything backing that up.
Okay. And when a person is becoming a Wendigo, it's like a permanent thing. Like it's not like a werewolf where they shift back and forth.
Right. Yeah. So it is a one-way trip. It's a one-way trip to becoming this monstrous being, basically. And there's there's specific rules for disposing of them to make sure that they can't regenerate or come back. The heart has to be destroyed, and the ashes have to be scattered to the four winds and or the four directions. So yeah, there are very particular things that have to happen, and she really doesn't want to have to do any of those things.
What do they look like?
So Wendigo, it's interesting because it does vary. Different people have different reports, but in general, it tends to be somebody a humanoid figure, because I mean, it is something that's taken over a person, but they tend to get bigger, but emaciated. So they might get taller and their shoulders drop, for example, but they get emaciated and kind of again, it comes back to that gluttony thing. They're wandering around, they're starving, they can't eat any meat other than human. So that's a big thing. And in fact, animals trust them. They're kind of a nature spirit in a certain way. But one of the things that I saw, and that differs sometimes, is that some will claim that they're around their mouths, their lips are missing, and it's just kind of bloody, tattered skin around it. And that's because with this hunger constantly, they'll chew at their own lips and end up chewing their own lips off. And so that's one common representation. Sometimes it's they're out there. You'll see the artwork because it's more interesting to people to create this art is that it looks kind of like a deer skull for the head, kind of. So they tend to have this bone or that shape, but still have that skin. It really differs. The artwork I see usually doesn't have skin on it. So that's why I was like, I'm not doing that. That's what, but that's not, that's not the tale I've heard, since I was younger. And a lot of time they can be covered with white fur. So the white fur will start growing.
Okay.
And I figure that's because this happens in winter and they're getting their nice little winter coat, right?
Is this who's your target for this? Is it young adult? Is it all ages?
It's
Is it
all ages.
okay?
Urban fantasy, I've noticed tends to be, yeah, adults, primarily women. I think more women read urban fantasy, which is funny because probably more men read high fantasy and sci-fi, right? But they're all kind of in the same family. But
Yeah.
urban fantasy does tend to be women and
Okay.
teenage girls.
All right. Is this standalone or part of a series?
It is intended to be the beginning of a series.
Okay.
I
All
already
right.
know
Cool.
a couple of the ones that are coming up and have that processing, but they are not written fully yet.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that most of your published work has been through short stories.
Mhm.
Why short stories? What made you go that route at first?
I started doing them to it was a learning process. If you're writing a novel, you gotta stick to the same thing. And yes, you are gonna learn something from writing a novel. But I found that writing short stories was something that I could do when I was working more than full time. It wasn't just full time when I started this. And it was like bite-sized chunks of being able to be creative. So I could do it when I was able to. And I didn't have to catch up on something. And then I discovered that I really loved writing short fiction. And I think horror in particular really lends itself to short form because you can hold that tension and suspense more consistently in short fiction than when you're trying to drag it out over a whole novel. And in a way, I just became pretty addicted to writing short stories because it was fun. Because you finish one and you have all these ideas in your head, right? Creatives always have all these ideas in their head. And just like readers, they will never get to all the books that are in their head. So there was always something that was ready to be next. And then there were fun calls for it because they put out theme calls sometimes, and that would inspire yet another story. And it's such a fast moving thing. The short story world and novel world is very slow. It's so slow. It's years for one book from beginning to end with everything that comes with it a lot of the time. And short stories, I could write as many as I had time to write, and I could send them out. I could submit them. They'd come back. I'd send them to somewhere different. And so sometimes I'd have multiple books coming out in a month with stories in them. And it was a pretty constant for a bit there until I stepped back and said, it's time to learn with novels, go back to novels and learn more on that. But it's fun and it's fast paced. It's great for somebody with a, with low attention span, a short attention span. So, yeah. But so short stories will always be my first love, and I'll never give them up completely.
What was the very first short story that you published? What was it about?
The first one sold, and then the magazine went under, but I learned very quickly how the short story world can work.
This is
That wasn't the last time. Well, it still won't be the last time. The first one I sold was about a a guy up in the mountains in Estes Park, which is a mountain town in Colorado Springs. It's also where the Stanley is, but it's on its own. It's a very neat town, and it's at the opening the to a park. The Rocky Mountains are there. There's a lot of stuff to look at, but it's Rocky Mountain National Park. And I had heard that there was a tale around there that locals knew that there was a blue mist that would creep out through the trees and down from the mountains. And it frustrated me because I could never find anything that said they were like this terrifying blue mist. And I was all cool. What did the blue mist do though? And not one of the stories said what it did. It just talked about this creepy blue mist. And I was like, well, then I will tell you what it does. The story was titled The Blue Mist, and it went into that. And that was fun getting to take a bit of local lore. I'm not necessarily, but local lore and create something from this thing that people were passing around and talking about all the time. So that one was fun. And I did resell it again right away after the other magazine went under. But yeah, that was my
how do
favorite.
you how do you think, your writing has evolved since then?
I would hope it's evolved a lot. I've learned a lot about kind of that journey of reading new authors. And I discovered that I'd read a lot of male horror authors and really not very many female horror authors. And yet there are plenty out there. They just don't have the name space that say Stephen King or Dean R. Koontz or any of those Jack Ketchum. Any of those folks do. And yet there's amazing stuff out there. And I wanted to read stuff from other countries, like not Western literature necessarily. And I branched out into that. So I've read a lot, and I hope that learning more about all these different type writing styles and reading things from other countries or people just not like me, and given reading the literature by men is reading something not like me, but it is what I'd grown up on, and it was probably super formative for my own writing. And so I hope that it's expanded to include flavors from different things that I've experienced since then. And hopefully, if one writes a lot, they get better at writing no matter what. Right? I think you should always be learning. I think even Stephen King would still have something to learn if if editors weren't like, "Oh, Stephen King wrote a book. Let's not check it. Let's just put it out." If he was still getting those edits, he'd still be learning. So
When you first got started writing, were there any female horror authors that you looked up to?
I'd read Shirley Jackson. Poppy Z. Bright was an early one for me, and Poppy is now Billy, so I don't want to dead name them, but he still publishes under that name or is going to. So Poppy Z. Bright was a big one for a while. And I didn't find people like Margaret Atwood, and I am gonna pronounce her name wrong. It's Shannon Dewey or Dew. I'm not sure how that last name is. And I'm sure I could sit here and come up with others. But yeah, in the beginning, Shirley Jackson and The Haunting of Hill House, that's a great book. And that was one of the first I read by a woman.
Okay. Yeah, I do have one of Tananarive Dew's books. I like it a lot. I forget what it's called, but it's a anthology that she did. It's a collection of short stories. It's pretty good. I enjoyed it a lot. Do you So we mentioned that you write primarily horror, you write fantasy. Are there any genres that you haven't written yet that you plan to or that you'd like to explore one day?
I'd like to play around with science fiction a little bit. It's not something that I've read a lot of, but I did read in that when I was a kid. My dad really liked science fiction and horror, and so I got a lot of exposure there. But I also have a couple mystery series I want to put together novel-wise, so that's something I definitely wanna dive into more. And I stepped away from horror for a bit, about we'll say 2 years ago. Time has lost all meaning since for me, like, there's this big blur right there in the middle, right? But we'll say about 2 years, and I wrote a couple mystery short stories and submitted those, and they got picked up and published pretty quickly, and it was like, I can do this," and it's fun being able to do that because I think a lot of different stories that are outside of mystery have a mystery element to them. Just like a lot of stuff that's not technically horror has horror elements, or romance is found in just about every genre out there, right? So, I they rub elbows a lot, but
Okay.
I enjoy writing different things, and I've had a little memoir piece published, and I do have a memoir I wanna write about my dad, who did some big things after being diagnosed with ALS, and he's gone now, but I'd like to write about what he did because I didn't find out some of the stuff he was doing and achieving until after he was dead. And I've had, like, a humor piece published, and yeah, I've dabbled,
Hmm.
but it was primarily horror.
Do you plan to Going forward, do you plan to stick with more full-length novels? Or are you still going to do a lot of short stories as well?
I think I've been sitting on a lot of novel ideas for long enough that I'm going to be focusing more on those for a bit, but I also think that I'll be doing short stories during, but fewer than I was doing for a while, and I would hope that that would also keep me fresh and, again, keep me learning, and also hopefully keep the joy of it. Because when you start focusing on novels, the joy can go out of it when it starts becoming business, right? And I don't want that to happen. I don't think anybody in a creative mindset and career or whatever should reach the point where they don't get to enjoy it anymore and feel like they're creating instead of limping and forcing themselves forward to meet deadlines or something. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I'd like to do both, but the focus for right now is going to be more on novels for once.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about mysteries, monsters, and mayhem. How long have you been doing the podcast for?
My friend and I started that, my co-host, Tim B. Partlow, started that during COVID because so we were both moms and I had younger teenagers and she had older teenager slash college student. And we had been doing things, we had been doing live stuff for writers once a month. We were used to being on stage together. And suddenly we couldn't anymore. And it moved to Zoom. And that kind of took away some of the fun of it. And we both ended up quitting our jobs about the same time. I was working in a restaurant, and that was absolutely miserable because people got terrible to restaurant workers during COVID, and which I still don't understand. But I've talked to now a lot of people who said the exact same thing that no matter how long they'd been working in restaurants, it people got nasty. And so I was done because I wasn't even supposed to be working with the public. I was a bookkeeper. And then I ended up having Long story short, I ended up a manager there while still being the bookkeeper and was working as a server and a cook to fill in because we had people with health issues who couldn't come in when there were COVID fears, and so they had to step away, so I was filling a lot of roles. But anyway, all of that, I had quit that and I went back to school because I figured, why not? We're not leaving. We're not spending any money. We're not burning any gas because we don't leave our house anymore. And so we started this. And it was something where I'd been listening to a true crime podcast for a while. It'd been something I'd been interested in. And then I said, well, I can do this. And I contacted her and said, I think I can do this. I think you can do this. You want to do this? And she said, let's do it. So we just started this podcast so that we could hang out and we could chat again and we could talk to people basically.
Okay. Now, is your subject matter, is that more like real stories or like fictional?
It's true. So it's true crime. And then when we can find a paranormal or cryptid story where it doesn't in the research completely eliminate it being a possibility. Because that happens a lot. If you actually start researching ghost stories to try and find a backstory, sometimes it just kills the whole thing because they it's not that deep. It's something that was just made up on the surface, but sometimes there's such great background to it. The case that the entity was based on is an example of that because they've never been able to disprove what happened to this woman, and it was witnessed by other people. So fascinating stuff like that. I can still do a story on. But yes, it's mostly true crime.
Okay. So it's more like real life monsters as in like people, like not like as opposed to like werewolves or things like that.
Absolutely. I've covered a couple interesting cryptids. I covered the Billywhack monster, if you've ever heard of him. There's something called Sinkhole Sam in Kansas that my co-host covered, if you've never heard of him. So we do throw those in. Those ones are fun. I liked the Billywhack monster because it was the background. Wasn't just here's a creature in the woods. It was we think the government created him. And
Oh,
in California, I wanna say near Ventura, but bear in mind, it's been a couple of years since I covered that one, but that one was a fun story. So,
any possibility that the Billywhack does exist?
I hope so. Just so sometimes you want it to be true, but I want Sasquatch to be real, so I'm gonna go ahead and choose to think that probably he's real, but it nobody had disproven it, and there was interesting if I remember right, there was something found underneath a farm that seemed like something had been happening down there, quite possibly government engineered. Now, did a being come out of that or not? I don't know, but they couldn't 100% eliminate the possibility.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I read on your profile that something you like to do besides writing is you like to go hiking.
Yeah.
Um, have you ever seen anything?
Sadly, no. I've seen enough coyotes around here. I haven't even seen a mountain lion, but we have them around here. I've seen plenty of coyotes and fox. I've seen a lynx. I have not seen a Sasquatch or anything like that, which is too bad.
Yeah. What do you think? What's your theory about Sasquatch? Is it like a relative of like some ape creature? Is it like a whole different species? Is it extraterrestrial?
Good question. It's not something I've thought about a lot. Like now, I think I thought about it a lot when I was a teenager, but just we are constantly finding new things in the wood, in the water, and I mean, I think they just found a new anaconda. We all knew there were anacondas, but they just found a new type of anaconda.
I saw that.
Yeah. So stuff like that. I'm like, we can say that we found everything, and then I feel that I don't know how often it happens, but a few times a year, I'm pretty sure we discover some new animal, some new bug, some new something. But I tend to see him as, I don't know, some sort of missing link, maybe some sort of in between or divergent evolution or something like that.
Okay. So despite not ever seeing anything on your hikes, do you still like find yourself looking over your shoulder if you hear a twig crack in the distance or anything like that?
Yeah, but usually that's 'cause you gotta worry about the other human beings on the trail,
Uh,
right?
true, true.
I'm less worried about the other stuff than running into the wrong person. I've only had
Mhm.
one experience hiking that was alarming, and luckily, I was one hill away from where my husband was working. So, we just went up this hill and showed up at his work a big, sweaty red mess because 'cause I'd been hiking heat and had to get away from some weird guy who kept there had been assaults out there, and he kept trying to get into my space and following me places, and I was like,
Mm,
"Nope." So, yep, showed up in a professional business office, like, "Hi, could you take me home? Because 'Cause I'm not hiking back through that park right now."
yeah. So during the work you've done on your podcast, are there any particular topics or stories that have really creeped you out, really scared you?
I would say more than creeping me out, scare me are the ones that just get to me emotionally. Once you're reading about that stuff, truly horrendous things have been done to people, and obviously, it's harder when it's done to kids. For example, a somewhat recent story I did were the Moore murders, and on the moors is where they were burying the bodies, and they it was a couple that was doing this together, and their victims were kids, and some of them died horribly. I think they all
Mm,
died horribly, actually, because it was never fast. But stuff like that, more than I would like to think that I have a healthy level of awareness, a step away from fear, right? About the possibilities in the world and being aware of things when I go out. And because anybody can be a victim at any time, you know? And so many people are taken from doing running errands or going for a walk or something like that. So yeah, but really it getting hit emotionally is more what happens. But I can't say that finding new ways somebody got into somebody's house or did something doesn't instill that bit of extra fear, like, "Oh, I didn't know I had to be afraid of that. Thank you." So, yeah.
so what would you say it is that draws you to horror?
A lot of horror it comes down to characters. Horror is only as effective as the character allows it to be. So, if you don't identify with the character or empathize with the character in some way, if you can't put yourself in their shoes or worry about them, you're not gonna be scared by whatever's happening. And I think that horror is frequently very much a character study. It's very much a study of humanity. It's a study of what humanity does in their worst moments. And for me, those are the things that interest me and fascinate me about it. And of course, that's why true crime kind of rolls in with that too, why that's been an interest. And I was interested in psychology, and I had an associate in psychology, but it made much more sense to get a business degree. But I did get to pursue the psychology some, and just human nature. It draws you in, but also there's a lot of reasons why horror. I even have like a whole workshop I do that has a section on why horror, but yeah, I'm gonna say for right now though, my answer is gonna be that human element of it and seeing how that works out.
Okay. Something else that you do that I'd like to talk about. Tell us a little bit about these author events that you've hosted.
Okay. Yeah. So I was with a group called Type Seek Writers, and it still exists in Colorado Springs. And we had multiple monthly events. We have an annual conference. It's actually one of the bigger writing conferences, pretty popular. It's known as the friendliest in various circles. And so I worked on that too. But I ran our monthly events. I did it alone first. And then when they needed somebody to come back, I said, I'll do it with help this time because it's a lot. It was a lot. And the big thing we did was called Right Brain, and that was pulling in a speaker on some facet of writing, and they would give a 2-hour workshop once a month. And so we were running those, and we had more intensive workshops that would be 4 hours and do other neat things for writers. It was just basically all the ways we could possibly provide programming for people. I think we had 5 monthly events when I reached the end of that, doing that position and passing it on to somebody else of various types. Like one was just a critique night. You come in, everybody critiques you, and there's one person running it who also does the in-depth critiques of your work. And another one where writers just got together at a restaurant and talked. That was called Writers Night. That's still going on. So programming like that. So we put in a lot of fun stuff, and there were longer events where we had to be up on stage and on our feet in multiple ways, right? So we had gotten good at playing off each other.
And those are things that you still do to this day?
I don't do them anymore. I've got,
Okay.
at this point, 3 jobs and paying ones, and that was all volunteer basis when I did that. I did all that for free. It was a lot of time. I was putting in, at one point, over 40 hours a week on a variety of volunteer jobs when my kids were little, and I was like, "Time for me to get paid to do stuff." But I took a lot of joy in getting to help other people and to find ways. I learned during all of that too. All that stuff that was being put on, I learned, and eventually I started being the person teaching workshops, right? But it was just I just really enjoyed being able to do that, and you always had new writers coming in and watching them grow, seeing them get published for the first time, seeing all of that. I had a thing on my blog where I would put out publications that were open for short stories in the next month, and people would report to me if one of those links led them to getting published, and so it was all that type of stuff. I really did enjoy it. I just simply couldn't spare the time to do that all the time anymore. So I still teach workshops and stuff to help when I can, but I'm not at that same level where my life is kind of revolving around helping more beginning writers.
Okay.
But those
So s
programs are ongoing, just to throw that out there. So there it is still being
okay.
run, it still is available.
Okay, cool. So speaking of sparing the time, you've mentioned that you have children.
Mhm.
How old were your children when you first got really involved in writing, and how were you able to kind of juggle responsibilities, like, between being a writer and a mom?
My very first writers conference that I went to, which jump started me, which was that Pikes Peak Writers Conference. And I went because a friend was supposed to be going, and she knew I was a writer, and she encouraged me to volunteer so that I could afford to go, which helped considerably. And one of my favorite authors at the time who wrote urban fantasy, Kelly Armstrong, was a guest there. And I did get to meet her, which was exciting. So that was when my kids, I have 2, and they're about 2.5 years apart. And that was the year that I could be gone for a weekend, and I was no longer a nursing mom. So the oldest would have been, they probably were about 2 and 4 or 1 and 3, somewhere in that neighborhood. And that's when I got to do it. And now they're teenagers. So that's how that journey's gone, right? One of them graduated high school last year. Another one graduates next year. So quite a range.
Yeah, did you have a difficult time, like, raising kids and writing, or was it pretty easy?
No, as it turned out, like, you think that you won't have time to do anything when they're really little because that's when it seems like they need the most stuff from you, and then you think once they get older, they don't need you anymore, and so you can do stuff, and I found that kind of reversed in some ways. I mean, my kids are really self-sufficient, but if anybody thinks teenagers don't need you to be present, they're wrong. As little kid when they were little kids, my husband traveled a lot, so in the evening, I had that to myself after the kids went to bed. He traveled for work, and I got a lot of writing done during those hours. So, I put the spend the take the kids, we were always outside, we were always doing stuff. We had our full days, and then they were in bed, and then I had me time, and I got to sit there and start writing. And then that's what kinda drove that. "Okay, I will go to this writer's conference. Maybe it's time I actually look at this as a job, this thing that I do sometimes for fun."
I have to ask, are your kids fans of your work? Do they read your books?
You know what? They don't read my books. It's just their
Oh,
friends do. Their friends listen to my podcast, and I don't think my kids listen to my podcast. But they both enjoy different kinds of horror that we've experienced together, like movies, and and reading and stuff. My daughter is more into horror than my son is, but he and I used to watch creature features a lot. That was what he really liked. So Tremors and like Placid and movies like that. And she liked Alien and Chucky and all the she liked the slasher, she's got into those, Scream, all of that stuff. So they gotten into it. We experienced it different ways. But for the longest time I wasn't letting them read, and I feel like that's when they were asking to do it, right? But they were too little because I was writing horror. And now that they're just I think there's a disconnect there. We're like, oh, we weren't allowed to read it. So they never got into it. So I don't know if they ever will.
I hope so. Do you have any favorite horror movies?
Oh, that changes all the time. I do really like Aliens. That's why both my kids ended up getting into that one. Alien and Aliens, but
Ah,
Aliens
okay.
is my favorite. And oh, what else? I just really enjoy. There are a lot of movies. I'm trying to think of something that I rewatch
Okay.
and struggling because I don't want to just sit here and think. But
Well, while you're thinking, I'll also mention that speaking of female horror authors, I read a book recently that was set in the Aliens universe. The author was V. Castro,
oh,
and she wrote a book called Aliens Vasquez, and it's about the character Vasquez from the movie and her children. And that was pretty good. I definitely recommend it if you haven't read it.
I bet because Vasquez is a favorite.
Hmm.
It's a good
Yeah,
character. So, and I
yeah,
have
she was a
heard of
badass.
Castro.
Yeah, check it out. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Definitely. I have an array of favorites. I tend to watch certain ones at certain times of year. So, for the holidays, it's always, I had to watch Krampus and I had to watch the original Black Christmas. I really like the original Black Christmas. That's a favorite film overall, I'd say.
I haven't seen it.
No, here's a fun fact. It's by the same guy that did A Christmas Story and Porky's.
Mm.
Which makes no sense if you watch Black Christmas, you would never connect. I would never have connected them had I not gone and looked and been like, "Oh, really? It's the same guy." And oddly, he treats the female character he intentionally set out to have the female characters be competent and able to take care of themselves and all this, and he made
So,
Porky's. I'm just going back to that.
well,
No, that's a good one.
that's from what, the 70s, I think?
Yeah. Yeah, and Margot Kidder is in it, in Black Christmas. Lois Lane from
Oh.
right? Yeah, that's what she played. So Lois Lane from the Christopher Reeves Superman movies is in
Oh,
it,
wow.
and she's quite an interesting character. She is not Lois Lane in that movie.
Okay. Well, that's cool that he was making, like you said, like, competent female characters, because horror movies, like, especially the older ones, that wasn't always the case, was it?
Right, and that was the slasher era where they do, of course, get killed off. I mean, it is still a slasher, but he created more interesting characters, I guess, than you find in some places.
Among your own writing, the horror stories that you've done, do you use a lot of female protagonists?
Interestingly, when I started out, I was writing mostly male characters. And again, I think that stemmed from that was what I'd been reading and experiencing. And that was one of those flips that occurred that I went, oh, well, let me flip that and started writing more female characters. So now
Okay.
I do. Now I do primarily write female protagonists. In the beginning, I did not.
Do you write in your horror stories, do you take people that you don't like in real life and write them in as a character in your books?
I actually don't. I know people that
Oh.
do. I tend to not. I might take an element here or there from a person, put into the character, good or bad. And but no, I've never just been like, I shall kill you. I've thought about it. But
Mhm.
I found I'm not that inspired by doing that.
Horror is it's a very varied genre. There's a lot of different, I guess you call them subgenres to it.
Yeah.
Do you have any particular favorites that you like to write about? Like monsters or supernatural or
I enjoy it's fun to create a new monster. So I do write across a bunch of the horror subgenres. I do need to say that up front, but it's fun to create a new monster. But I think that my favorite is tends more toward the psychological just because again, I mean, I've expressed an interest in psychology and that. So it's something that kind of creeps up on you and messes with your head more than an actual monster killing somebody. But in terms of what sells, it's usually monsters. But I've never been one to write just to sell. So I create all kinds of things. But yeah, I like things that are one-offs and do something different, and I try all kinds of different things.
okay. Now are you self-published or do you have a publisher?
For the novel, self-published, and for my collections and everything, the short stories were going out in traditional magazines and books and publications. And then what I started doing is I would get my rights back on it, and somebody else would have already made their money off of it, and I got my stipend, whatever my payment was for it, and packaging them up and putting them out so I had control over my stories, and that that is something I'm happy I did, and it got me to where I am now. So it opened doors for me by doing that. But that was, yeah, self-published.
When you were submitting stories to, like, magazines, did you ever have any issues where, like, they'd come back and say, "Oh, you can't write about that," or, like, "That's too scary," or stuff like that?
I had somebody come back. I had a story. It's actually in the collection because I gave up trying to sell it to anybody because it was early enough on that I was going to listen to what the editor said and I was going to change my story. And then each editor said something different, you know? So here was the big thing with it. It was called Cravings, and it was about a pregnant woman having increasingly problematic cravings for, yes, for meats of various types, we'll say. And there was a dog, and I loved this dog. This dog was a character in the story. They had a dog, and this was their first pregnancy. And I I didn't kill the dog. I'm gonna be clear about that. I did not kill the dog the first time, but she, while it's trying to be protective of her, she bites it. And I had the first editor come back and say, I wish you'd gone all the way and killed the dog, which is not, let me tell you, that's unusual to get that feedback. Most of them are like, don't even submit a story here if you killed a animal, you know? But I wish you gone all the way. You should have just gone all the way instead of doing this. But it bothered me that she bit the dog the way she did, but you should have killed it. And I was like, okay, so I killed it. And I submitted it to somebody different. And oh, were they mad that I killed it. And everything I eventually had 2 different versions of this story, or 3, I think, and I would read through the requirements, always read through their guidelines and see which one might fit them best and try and send it, and I got so much feedback, which to me, looking back then, I was just grumpy about it. Looking back, I think I must have achieved making the dog a character, which is probably a good thing, but when I ultimately published it, I'll just say it now, I did not kill the dog. I have the
I
dog removed from the situation, but it also made me sad because I felt like it took away some of its characterhood, we'll say.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so
Okay.
there have been things like that and things that, you know what, this is disturbing, but we can't post. We can't put that in this particular magazine. It doesn't fit, or it doesn't fit with the theme that kind of worked out. That's the thing with short stories is even if there's not a theme, it will find a theme through the submissions that are coming in, and sometimes you're rejected purely for that, that doesn't match that, so,
Would you have any advice for newer authors who are looking to submit short stories?
yeah, I would say do a search to find Submission Grinder. It's free, and it's something where you can plug in it'll be like, what length is your story? What genre is your story? Some other stipulations, like how much you might want to be paid, that sort of thing. And you can plug that information in and it will pull up a list of publications currently taking submissions. And there is a paid one that is called Duotrope, Duotrope. I'd say at the beginning, start with the free. And if you're submitting enough, then that's when you would consider paying for the annual service with the other company. But other than that, that's more logistical advice. But other than that, I'd say just keep going and just keep writing more stories. And by all means, have fun with it when you're doing it. If you can sell it when you're done, that's fantastic. But in the beginning, be writing it and learning how to do that and learning what works for you and then be submitting it and always be writing something new.
Yes, that's important.
Yeah.
Do you have any writing rituals?
I used to, and they've gone right out the window. I used to have a whole thing. I just sit at my desk and I had to put on my mint and rosemary, I think it was lotion. And and when I was doing that with the toddler, I had this whole thing where my son would be out to school and my daughter, I would make her this little snack plate and carry her toys down, and set her up there and set myself up at the desk and do my wrote. Now I'm like, oh, I have some time to write. I'm gonna do that right now, no matter where I am. That was one of those things I learned as things went. It's not always gonna be perfect. And if you wait for the perfect time to write, you're probably never gonna have time to write. So
Mhm.
do it when you can, how you can. But
Yeah.
it doesn't hurt to have a ritual. So I'm not saying anything against him at all. That's probably what got me to where I could regularly figure it all out. So
Alright.
yeah,
Well, Shannon, this has been a very fun hour chatting with you, and I'd like to first of all congratulate you on your upcoming book,
I think
Myth Stalker: Wendigo Nights. I'd imagine people can find that on Amazon?
they can. It's available Amazon, but for folks who don't
Okay.
like Amazon, it's also other online like Barnes and Noble. You can get it there. And you can find I have a universal link out there, and it's my website is thewarriormuse.com, and I have a publications tab, and there's just one link you can click, and it'll take you to all the places you can get it in ebook and paperback right now. So
Okay.
it's a neat little thing.
And, people can probably go to your website, thewarriormuse.com, and find information on your other books as well?
Yes,
Okay,
they're all
cool. Do you have any social media handles you'd like to throw out there that you interact with people on?
I do. I can be found, and again, those can be I try and make the website a one-stop shop, so I do have a tab
Okay,
that people can find all of my social media, but the 2 main places I am are on Facebook, where I have a page under it has both my name and my website name because I was branded under a blog first, and it's Shannon Lawrence, The Warrior Muse, so you can find it by either of those names. And Instagram, it's The Warrior Muse.
okay. Awesome, and Shannon, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you. This was nice. Thank you again.
Thank you, and thanks to all of you who are gonna be listening to this. If you wanna find out more, information on the podcast, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Just search for A Happy Moment. Alright, thanks again, everybody.